and now Kurt Cobain.
They were not a mainstream band. They just weren't. They didn't see themselves as that. They didn't want to be that. And they became that. So, you know, in a way that was the precursor as well to, you know, what happened with Suede and with Britpop, I think. There was a bunch of people that came from Smash Hits and went on to Select.
Yeah.
And I feel like Select magazine was actually one of the things that changed stuff, because it was set up as a mainstream magazine, but it had an interest in alternative music. But it was odd for bands like us to even be in Smash Hits, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was an odd new thing too.
Yeah, and I mean, Select, I mean, you probably don't remember, but I do. We had posters in the middle that you could put up. It's just that they weren't posters of, you know, Bros. They were posters of Blur or Elastica.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I feel like Select was... it really heralded something different in that way. You know, it definitely was part of the reason us lot crossed over. It felt like that at the time. And, you know, it was very mainstream. And it was mainstream in its attitudes, and it had mainstream pretensions, but it was covering cool bands.
That was Justine Frischmann talking about Select magazine.
We used to send our bands down this pub called the Good Mixer in Camden, which was a horrible spit and sawdust pub full of old men, actually quite nice. And then they moved to another pub in Camden called the Spread Eagle, and then the Edinburgh Castle. That wasn't manufactured, that was just happened because of convenience.
It was kind of this weekly snog fest where everyone got off with everyone and they played loud music and everyone was in a band. I remember Pulp being down there, and Blur and 5:30 and us lot. Probably kind of menswear when they were all 12.
When Elastica formed, did you find it was quite easy to get media attention?
Yeah, it was incredibly easy for us to get media attention. You know, I'd been in Suede for 2 years, and we couldn't get arrested. There was sort of 2 people at the gigs, and you know, I remember sitting in some kind of A&R office because I was the bird. You know, with a demo tape, like 8 hours waiting to see someone, and you know, for them to take the demo tape. You just couldn't get arrested, and you know, with Elastica, Suede had already happened. And yeah, it was, I mean, we had to do our first gig under a secret name because we didn't want press attention. We actually wanted to have some practice time. And, you know, our first demo tape ended up kind of going around all the record companies. Like, we were getting calls from everyone. It was the opposite. It was just like, it was lightning.
And that, I mean, that's quite exciting. It must have been, given that, you know, having spent the time not getting arrested to get arrested. It's quite nice.
Yeah, it's incredibly nice. I mean, it was fantastic at the time. It was so exciting, and you know, it felt like the time and the place. It was just one of those weird moments where everything lines up. You know, for a bunch of people, not just us. You know, just people were looking in that direction. I don't really remember when the crossover happened. You know, obviously the tabloid thing stepped in at some point, and that's when stuff got scary and less fun.
In what way?
It just became more invasive. It just seemed very odd, you know, it didn't seem appropriate for the music we were making. You know, the tabloid press is fairly horrifying, and it's just not nice to be in there. And, you know, it's what they write just makes you want to throw up when you read it. And it's not nice being followed around by press every time you open the door. I mean, I never really felt like the kind of people we were sort of warranted that. It didn't feel like a bunch of indie music people had become celebs. It was just weird. I couldn't relate to it. You know, it didn't seem like that had happened before. I don't know. I certainly wasn't expecting it, put it that way.
But once the tabloids are off the leash, they're hard to control, as Justine Frischmann found. You're in a band, you were having successful records, people were coming to your gigs. That's all brilliant. That's kind of what you want as a band, isn't it? That's absolutely fantastic. But when that you started getting tabloid attention, how did it manifest itself? Was it photographers following you, or? Yeah,
it was photographers following us, and, you know, people taking our rubbish to go through our rubbish and see if they could get anything that they could write about. And, you know, people kind of bothering my family, and just a lot of stuff written that just wasn't true. You know, I absolutely hated it. It ruined the whole thing for me. I mean, It's funny, I often wonder about that time and whether I could have handled it better if I'd been a bit older. But actually, I don't really know how anyone handles tabloid attention. I think it's so ugly.
And it was very difficult for Damon, wasn't it? Because at one point he became like the national, not bad guy, but, it was like Liam won and Damon lost. And so
I don't know.
I don't think in the long term that's true at all, but there was a point where he was, walking down the road and people were singing Oasis songs at him, which must have been really difficult.
I think probably the most difficult thing was him walking down the road and having people sing Blur songs at him. I remember we went on holiday to Spain and we just couldn't find anywhere to go where people didn't recognise him. We couldn't have a single meal without people coming up to us or taking pictures, and we couldn't be on a beach, and we actually just couldn't find anywhere to go. We'd get in the car and drive for 3 hours to the most remote place we could find, and there would be a bunch of Blur fans there. And it struck me at that point how incredibly stupid it was that, we were spending our whole lives trying to get more famous, and it actually just wasn't that great.
Was it a hard thing to get over, given that you were in the epicentre of it and, were famous and successful, and it was amazing?
Yeah, I felt like it took its toll on me mentally and spiritually. It took me some time to readjust, and I actually had to leave England to feel like I was back to normal. At some point I really realised that I wanted to be anonymous again, or I wanted to walk down the street and be anonymous. And I actually felt like I had to leave the country to do that. Pretty much as soon as I got out of England, I started feeling like my life was able to sort of get back to normal.